First of all, I would like to invite Danesh, and I'll tell you something a little bit about Danesh, our first speaker. Danesh is one of the directors of Tindak Malaysia. He joined us in 2013 as a volunteer handling the GIS because that's when we were just embarking on reforming the delimitation process. This involved maps. His mapping background was invaluable to help us to make significant progress. Currently, he specializes in areas of redelineation on electoral boundaries, on the overall systems of elections and governance. Since 2015, he has made presentations on the topic of redelineation in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur. And several experts and activists have reached out to him on matters of redelineation as well as the electoral system. Danesh pioneered what I believe is Malaysia's first ever interactive online electoral map portal, which is hosted on the Tindak Malaysia website. He is eminently qualified to be talking to you about this business of objecting to delimitation process by the Election Commission. Over to you, Danesh.
Okay. Thank you very much, Singham. But just bear with me. We just want to check whether we have gone Facebook Live or not. Meanwhile, I will just share my screen.
Sure.
I believe everyone is able to see my PowerPoint slides. Okay, I will make a start anyway. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for clearing your Saturday afternoon to listen to me on this particular topic on your duty as a redelineation objector. So as mentioned by Singham, the redelineation is the process of redrawing electoral boundaries. And there's so many aspects to look into it. Right? And we're just looking one aspect, whereby we want to know whether you as a voter know what to do when the boundaries is altered. Okay. So in my presentation, we'll go through some key points, because at the end of the day, we want you to come out not just knowing about the process, but also being ready to be an objector. And the preparation to be an objector starts today, not when you hear the story or the news that the redelineation notice got issued. So we have to go through the constitutional principles briefly. We want to know who can object, why should we object, and very important, on what grounds can you object? The do's and the don'ts for the objection grounds. Okay, let's recap some of the constitutional principles about redelineation. Okay, this is just a quick brief. We are not delving too much into this because that requires a separate presentation of its own. So if you read our constitution, the various articles related or influences of electoral boundaries is found in Article 2, that is relating to the state boundaries and adding a new states. 46, the number of seats for the Dewan Rakyat. 113, the start of the election section. 114, 115, 116, 117, and also the 13th schedule. The 13th schedule really outlines the contents on how an electoral boundary should be drawn for every constituency in this country. And very important, we need to stress that the redelineation must be done in a way to comply with the 13th schedule principles. And here are the quick points that underpins this 13th schedule principle. The federal seats are nested within the state. That means your parliamentary seat, your DUN seats shall be within one state or one territory, and the DUN doesn't cross federal seat boundaries. What I mean by that is your DUN is a subset to parliament. A parliament at minimum will have 2 DUNs. A DUN can only belong to one parliamentary seat or federal seat. It's as a matter of fact, among the 4 principles of the 13th schedule, this is the only one that is being honored. Now, you have to ensure your constituency is drawn such that it has enough facilities for polling and voter registration. Of course, the topic of voter registration may become redundant quite soon once AVR gets implemented, but that opens up the bigger issue at hand. Is your constituency drawn with enough facilities, especially we're considering 5 to 6 million new voters at minimum coming into our electoral roll? And through our Tindak Malaysia's 3-year research, we have found out our constituencies were drawn without proper consideration of polling facilities. Then the other part, constituencies to have an approximately equal voting population within a state for the moment, as is defined right now, exception of rural constituency and country districts where an weightage of area ought to be applied for those districts. This is to ensure that every constituency have an equal voting power. All the voters, irrespective of their geography, irrespective of their background, is to be treated equally. What underlies this principle is one person, one vote, one value. Of course, there is this exception. And this exception hinges if there is difficulty in reaching electors. So this is something that EC needs to come clean about it, because the way it is being done, nothing is clearly communicated on how some certain constituencies have too little voters, and then this exception comes into play. Okay, this is violated. A violation of 2C, this is under the section 2 of 13th apportionment. And then you need to preserve local ties. Your constituencies is drawn in a manner that brings the communities of interest together, not divide up the community or arbitrarily lumping people together. So this is where you relate to local council boundaries, you relate to district boundaries, you relate to other forms of micro-local ties. Okay? And upfront, I'm telling you, 2D is also violated. A violation of 2D will give birth to gerrymandering. Now, for our presentation today, we will look on the second part of the 13th schedule, because our concern today of our presentation is about the objection process. Okay, so what in the 13th schedule part 2 states, we have some key principles. First, the EC needs to inform their proposed recommendation. That means EC does a provisionally determined boundaries of all the constituencies. And this notice is this is communicated to the Speaker of the Parliament, to the Prime Minister, and a notice via the Gazette, and at minimum one newspaper, the keyword must be highlighted, of the affected constituency. Okay. So for this period of when that notice comes out, right, especially let's say it comes out to a newspaper, from the recent track, EC actually doesn't just limit to one newspaper, they actually went to do 2 or 3. And in the 2016 and 18 redelineation exercise, they actually put it on the website. So you can actually even study the whole process from the comfort of your computer. The moment that notice goes out, you are given 1 month to study, hence analyze it. If you agree or disagree, you make the necessary effort to organize the group of people, which I will highlight to you later, and then prepare the documentation and submit to EC within 1 month. And from our experience, 1 month goes extremely fast. And considering how EC puts up the information of the alteration of constituencies, 1 month goes, it's not on our side. Hence, that is why we do the webinar today, not when the redelineation notice comes into play, because that is just too late. Okay. Who can EC receive their representation? There's 3 bodies: state government, local authorities, a body of 100 voters or more of the constituency in question. And our presentation takes more of an angle with a focus on the body of 100 voters or more. Okay. Then the EC will carry out a local inquiry based on the accepted representations, and EC carries out this inquiry within the powers provided by the Commissions of Inquiry Act 1950. And this process will only repeat one more time. Okay, if the first round you received a lot of objections or support, EC will look into it and they say, okay, I think we have to make change. Then they will repeat this whole thing, as I mentioned before in the key principles, for one more time. Okay. And then you have one more month again to assess the new proposal. Now, we need to be on alert on the 3 ways that can trigger redelineation. Refer to Article 113. Rarely talked about is actually when you add new states or territories, or you alter the boundaries of states or territories, you can trigger redelineation. It goes back to the 13th schedule principle. The federal seat is to be nested within the state. Okay. So examples of this would be when Sabah and Sarawak and formed a partnership with Malaya to form Malaysia. Then the redelineation was triggered. I mean, in that case, there was more for delineation. Then when Kuala Lumpur was excised from Selangor, it actually coincided during a redelineation period. That itself is an example. Same for Putrajaya and Labuan. Okay. I'm just letting you know at this point of time, it's quite unthinkable for state boundaries to alter because it requires the approval of the state legislature. This is the other important possibility. After 8 years lapsed from the completion of the last review, hence the last change of electoral boundaries for a unit of review, that is states of Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak, which I'll highlight on this in the coming slide. What I meant is when the redelineation report is submitted to the Prime Minister after that 1 or 2 rounds of inquiries, that's the date the review is completed. Okay. So after 8 years, EC can do the redelineation to comply with the principles of 13th schedule. There is no more upper limit since that was taken out in 1984. The other one, when the number of parliamentary, Dewan Rakyat to be specific, constituencies or seats and DUN constituencies changes, go up or go down, that will trigger redelineation. Okay, because at the end of the day, redelineation in Malaysia's context is actually just drawing the boundaries within the state. The Election Commission has lost the power to allocate seats and move around seats, especially federal seats, from one state to another state since 1973. And now you will understand why I'm talking about this. Since last year, to be specific, August or September, we have heard 2 states were thinking to increase their DUN constituencies. First was Terengganu. They were thinking to increase, but we have not heard anything. Then recently, Penang in June, they were also thinking to increase the DUN constituencies. So as referred to the previous point, that will trigger redelineation upon this, this increase or decrease is gazetted. Okay? The other situation we need to be on alert, and this is specifically for voters in Sarawak. Since the last redelineation review was done in Sarawak in 2015, more like closer to end of 2015, the next redelineation may take place anytime from late 2023. So if you ask me, this webinar is actually primarily came out because we have this awareness of these 2 potential situations that can trigger redelineation. Okay, so just to give you a context, the 3 units of review, states of Malaya consist of all the states in Peninsular Malaysia plus all the federal territories, including Labuan. So the redelineation for this, for when it's done for states of Malaya, only just covers these areas I've mentioned. For Sabah, it is done separately. For Sarawak, it's done separately. But all of them can occur at the same time, so long it meets, as I mentioned before, after the 8 years have lapsed. So you will notice in the recent redelineation cycles, the redelineation for Sabah and Peninsular Malaysia is more or less done in the same year. It's just Sarawak is done on a different timing. And that's because it is a separate unit of review. And the redelineation period, the last redelineation that was done, was separate to the others. Okay, now, who can object? This is very important. As a matter of fact, this crux of the webinar is about 3 groups of people: the state government, local authority, body of 100 voters or more. Okay? But we must understand, it's not just as straightforward that the state government can object, or you can proceed and object, or even make a support statement. We need to know what are the conditions that qualifies your group to make this representation. For state government and local authority, their area should consist wholly or partly of constituencies affected by EC's recommendation. That means there's some tinkering of the boundaries. Okay. I'm not very sure if whether the Penang, let's say the state government or local authority can also consider object if the state, if there is no alteration but the constituency name got changed. I think they should have the right to make an objection if the constituency name is not reflective of the area. Now, for the voters, for a body of 100 voters or more, the voters must be found in the current electoral roll, i.e. at the point of redelineation, and belong to constituencies found affected by EC's recommendations. I want to highlight the word found affected. So any form of alteration, you as a voter who happens to be in that area have the right to make your representation to the election commission. So this is what you're going to face when the redelineation notice comes out. Okay. And the focus is specifically for body 100 voters or more. It starts with you. So first, you as a voter came to know that the boundaries of a constituency got altered. Okay, what you should do? You feel, maybe I don't think so, I agree, or I agree. This is where you need to quickly mobilize a body of 100 objectors who needs to be voters or the constituencies affected by the recommendation. And very important, we need to highlight, include a resident lawyer who happens to be a voter of the affected constituency. You cannot just simply drag a lawyer to be part of the objection group, because EC will not entertain that. EC is only concerned if you belong to a constituency that is affected or altered by the EC's proposal. Then, with those people that you mobilized, you need to analyze the EC's proposal, or this even can be done when you're organizing, and see what EC has done correct and see what EC has done not correct or could be improved. Okay, then you need to analyze, then you have to write the clear objection grounds in the objection form. Then you submit it to EC within that 1 month. Okay, then we hope for the best that you will be called by EC for the inquiry. And this is where you need to ready up with the clear objection grounds. My next speaker will speak more on this practical aspect, so I will not dwell too much into it. And when the inquiry is done, strive to ensure as much as possible to convince the EC to accept wholly or partly of your objections. So now you can see why 30 days is very short, right? You have to go 1, 2, and 3. So at least that would take a lot of time. Even organizing 100 objectors is not an easy process. So why you should object? Because we want to ensure that the boundaries drawn by the Election Commission respect the principles of the 13th schedule. To ensure better representation of your constituency so that your Aduna MP can serve you effectively. To prevent bulldozing of any electoral boundary rigging, we want to show to EC that we are concerned by the proposal and hence we are making this representation. Okay. So now let's study some of the conditions for objection grounds. Okay. And it's particularly a message for those who are organizing about 100 voters or more. Okay. And I will just show you one example. This is a very complex example, and so please bear with me, and I'll go through this slowly. Okay. You see the black dashed circles. This is the existing parliamentary boundaries. The blue text, P100, P100 101, P100 02, they are the existing parliamentary constituency number. N1, N2, N3, N4 are the Dun constituencies, the existing one. Okay. P100 has two Dun constituencies for this example, which has N1 and N2. Okay. Now, P101 happens to have one of the Duns called N3. Okay, for simplicity purpose, I'm not going to add more. Okay. N3 belongs to P101. Okay. And then you have P102, of which it has one Dun called N4. A, B, C, D, E, F represents the areas. From the perspective of from an electoral roll, it refers to polling district. Each of you is assigned to a polling district, which defines where you vote and defines your constituency. You know, it actually assigns you to a constituency. The red boundaries you see is the proposed boundaries by EC. Let's say they give you this for the first time. Question is, among the voters A, B, C, D, E, and F, we want to know who can qualify. And this is the complex part. And this is something I may not necessarily agree what has been laid out in the Constitution, but I have to explain as it is for you. Okay. So as mentioned before, you had three original parliamentary constituencies, 100 to 102. This is the Dun numbers. So areas A and B belongs to N1. Okay. P101 has one of the Duns called N3. So D and E belongs to N3. P102 has one Dun called N4. So in this proposal, there was no change taking place in P102 and no change taking place in N4. So in this proposed redelineation, there's a new parliamentary seat of P103. The P103 just covered just N1, and then P104 covers parts of N2 and parts of N3. I know this is a bit complicated, but basically the areas, if you're a voter, you're affected, primarily would be B, C, and D, but voters of E and A is also affected by this, because some of you, of your fellow voters, are not going to be with you anymore after this. So in a way, you're affected by this. So who can object? B and C. Okay. B used to belong to P100, and then now it becomes part of P103. Okay. C used to be part of P100, now moved to P104. Okay. Then A and B, because some of you guys is no more with P100. You're going out. You're going to be taken out. Okay. Then those in C and D. Okay. This we noticed came from the slides that EC presented 7 years ago. Okay. For some reason, they were silent whether D and E can object. My interpretation is D and E can object. This is because some of you guys used to be in P101 and you guys are taken out. So you, in a way, you're affected by it. Okay. But voters of A, let's say you want to object, voters of A of P100 and F, you can't make the combination A and F. And sad to say, from our analysis, of the redelineation report of 2016 and 18, voters in F, unfortunately, their objection or representations will not be considered because there was no alteration. Sad, but this is the reality. Because the end game of a redelineation review is to ensure all constituencies are drawn in a manner that is respecting the 13th schedule, of which I mentioned before, right? Especially those three principles were violated. Does it have enough polling facilities? Does it respect the equality of voters? Does it respect local ties? Right? So let's say if N4 has too many voters, but no boundary alteration was made, sad to say, their representation will not be accepted by EC unless EC does otherwise. Okay? And I will highlight to you in specific examples after this. So let's look at the do's and don'ts, especially when you organize objections and especially writing down objection grounds. Object to the constituency that is affected by the redelineation's recommendations. Okay, why I'm mentioning this to you. In the second round of redelineation review, the Penang state government objected EC's proposal. In the whole state of Penang, only 2 or 3 constituencies, or maybe even up to 4, were affected by the redelineation. To be specific, the proposal was mere alteration of a small section of the boundary. So when the Penang state government lodged the objection, they mentioned they didn't agree with the other constituencies that were not altered by the proposal. And I believe Penang state government had legitimate reason to raise that, because there are some constituencies were just too small, or some constituencies have too many voters. So it's just a violation of 13th schedule. Right? Of course, EC decided to reject Penang state government's objection. And one of the reasons is because Penang state government did not refer to the constituency that was affected by the redelineation's recommendations. To be specific, the 2 parliamentary constituencies that experienced redelineation at that time was Balik Pulau and Kepala Batas. And based on the redelineation report that EC puts up on the website, the Penang state government did not mention these constituencies or the duns under these constituencies. Okay? So you need to object to a constituency that is affected by the redelineation recommendation. My fellow speaker, Teresa, objected to a constituency that was affected by this proposal. Okay? And when you gather voters, this is a recommendation. You should include voters who are shifted by the recommendation. So maybe you had a new area got added into your constituency. You should bring at least 1 or 2 people from there to your group. Maybe you represent a small taman, but to be sure that you at least you get a chance to make your view clear to EC, try to include the ones who moved in. Okay, and mentioned before, a lawyer who is part of the constituency that is affected by the recommendation, because at least he or she can give you the necessary guidance on how to object. Please object on multiple grounds. Don't hinge on objecting on one ground. Now, some objections on one ground seems to work, but I don't necessarily will put one egg in the basket and present to EC. Okay, I'll try to give multiple and see which one they will accept. So you can disagree with the movement of polling district, renaming, reshaping. You can, like in the case of Sabah's redelineation, some even called for additional polling centers or even movement of polling centers. Even was very specific. One of them suggested we should even look into changing the polling hours. Don'ts. Object the whole state without specific reference to the affected constituency. Okay, let's look back in the 2016-2018 redelineation exercise. First round. Okay, one of the objections came from the Penang state government. And based on the report that EC put up, Penang state government has laid out very general points of why they didn't agree with EC's proposal. and EC rejected it. Why? You're not referring to the affected constituency. This is a sad fact, but this is what has happened. And please do not object with race or religious-based motivations unless you find evidence of race-based gerrymandering. In the early days of our election commission, especially when the Sarawak delineation took place in the 60s, there were some groups who were objecting based on racial or religious grounds, and EC just flatly refused to entertain. Okay, right now, it's a bit of maybe it's a 50-50, but this is, we will not even recommend this unless you find evidence that race-based gerrymandering has taken place. Okay, manipulation of electoral boundaries with the ethnic flair. Other considerations. Okay, if your state doesn't experience any form of alteration by the recommendation, your chances to make representation will be limited, right? Even though the constituencies are in violation of the 13th schedule. Good example would be police. In the 2016-18 redelineation exercise, the first round, no boundary alteration. Two groups want to subject their representation. The EC said, well, there's no alteration, so we will not proceed with the inquiry. This is a sad fact. This applies to Putrajaya and Labuan by default because they only have one parliamentary constituency and no dues. So if your whole state experiences a limited alteration, like Penang, try to support groups who are objecting in the areas affected by the alteration. So for example, if the constituencies that are affected was Balik Pulau, Kepala Batas, then you should find and support those groups to ensure that they get the chance to be represented during the inquiry. Okay. If you succeed to get yourself for the local inquiry process and have valid objections, keep your expectations manageable, because this is a sad fact of the reality of the EC. You can have valid grounds why the constituency is drawn violate the 13th schedule, but EC will just say, I will not accept that argument. They might accept some other argument. So that is why it goes back to my point. Object on multiple grounds so that even if EC were to decline one part of your argument, EC can still pick the other arguments of yours and at least influence the process. Okay. And this is something I need to highlight to you. So once you've done the inquiry, you make your views. EC actually doesn't tell you whether your first round of views was accepted. So when the second proposal by EC comes, you can roughly guess, okay, that your representation, your objection influenced in a way that EC had to alter. The challenge comes is the second round, because in the second round is the final round. So once you put out your views, you're kept in the dark until the redelineation report is laid in the Dewan Rakyat. Then you will know, oh, so that is where my objection grounds was accepted, where the wholly or partly or the whole thing was rejected. Okay. So I will come to the end of my presentation. What I want to highlight to you is you must know your rights and responsibilities during a proposed redelineation recommendation. So if you're about 100 voters or more affected by the proposal, please be ready to make your representation, i.e. an objection, to EC. Okay. And you have to acknowledge, and this is something I may not agree, but we have to acknowledge, groups who can make representation to EC have a limited space, right? Unless EC decided to alter all constituencies, then the space is expanded. And also have limited time to organize your views and submit to EC. And be strategic in your objection. Hence, multiple grounds, who you bring into your objection group. And try to focus on the affected constituencies. And always have a resident lawyer in the electoral roll of the affected constituency to be ready, to be included. So that is all from me. And I'll hand it back to Singapore.